Now, I realize we've been at this for some time already, but at the risk of derailing the dialogue you initiated, and may I just say how thrilled I am that you did, Karkat, I would like to qualify my entire analysis of your Alternian culture by saying that in contrast with life on Bepharus, while your people may have been engaged in violent lethal class struggle for millions of sweeps, by no means does this imply that the Bepharan way of life was entirely without problematic elements, perhaps even more disturbing and insidious for their lack of acknowledgement and open discussion, particularly as a consequence of what in my view were widely and dismayingly unexamined systemic social injustices resulting from the entrenched power dynamics in play. Dynamics strikingly similar to those of your planet's markedly more bellicose iteration, which has only served to fully vindicate my hypothesis that such a hierarchy is really predicated on intrinsic dysfunction and failure to shift all the usual narratives and undiagnosed problems into an open, judgment-free discourse through which problematic issues are constructively channeled into more intelligently problematized avenues of discussion. Now, before I continue, it is only decent of me to warn you about certain triggers that are surely ahead in this essay. Conversation. Triggers include, but likely will not be limited to, class oppression, calling culture and violence against grubs, lusus abuse, complementary and analogous hate speech, pale filling, slurries and other concupiscent fluids, lifespan shaming, ableist slurs, prolix dissertation. Actually, maybe it would be easier for you to list your triggers, and I'll do my best to avoid those topics or navigate them more delicately if at all possible. Trigger warning: oppression, calling, grub, violence, lusus abuse, homophobia, pale slurries. Great. It sounds like you don't have any triggers. At least none that you know about. I'll proceed with caution nevertheless. Just please, let me know if you start feeling triggered by anything I'm saying, and we can take a brief time out while you summon your Moirail to help pacify you. Assuming you have one. Not that I'm presuming you do, but I heard you did, is that correct? If not, I apologize. I further apologize if your orientation precludes the possibility, as a paleromantic, pan-quadrant demi-romantic, something in the grey pale sexual department or such. And hopefully, you are not triggered by such presumptuous concilionormative language. It wouldn't be the first time I was guilty of such an inexcusable microaggression, and I am not so oblivious to my own romantic privilege to believe it will be the last time either. Concilionormativity, microaggressions, rom privilege, presumptuous moirails. I'm glad I brought up the subject of unexamined privilege because it dovetails beautifully with the point I was about to make regarding Bepharan society and its savage umbral potentiality, which later manifested through the kind of Alternian brutality you are all too familiar with. Those in the higher echelons of the hemospectrum, such as ceruleans or blue bloods, careful, being loose with such terminology is opening the floodgates to a whole host of toxic sinus language and homophobic slurs. When addressing the challenges faced by those lower on the spectrum, such as mid-hues or in particular warm caste like umbers, ochres, or rust bloods, another slur highly problematic, deeply offensive and triggering, strongly imploring you to steer clear of this term, they would be well advised to check their cerulean privilege, particularly before dismissing hardships or marginalizing claims of oppression, which can be difficult for them to identify or emphasize with from their advantageous position within the Bepharan/Alternian power structures. Dovetail, problematic power structures, toxic sinus language. And some may argue that in our peaceful utopian culture that we have freed ourselves from injustice and disparities in privilege in a post-scarcity economy, largely equal rights distributed across the hemispectrum, and therefore exist in a post-spectral world, laugh out loud, and therefore there is no need to champion important social causes and there is nothing left to debate. But really nothing could be further from the truth. You just need to educate yourself and carefully investigate the long-standing power dynamics in play. For instance, a seemingly harmless remark from a cis-blooded cerulean toward an umber or god forbid a burgundy or yes even a warm identifying physically cooler caste about their very long-term future plans such as on the order of centuries, then this may prove to be a very hurtful microaggression due to the fact that low hues cannot possibly live that long themselves, and the more privileged caste could easily outlive dozens of generations of mid-hues or hundreds of generations of buoys, burgundy, umber, ochre, yellow, greens. Note, please avoid describing the lattermost as lime bloods, as it has historically been used as an especially vicious epithet. Such remarks can further trigger painful reminders of how cooler castes, to some extent OJAs, but CIPs and Royal Vs in particular, have been able to use their tremendous lifespans over the millennia to gain a stranglehold over the social order, have been able to completely dictate our societal evolution by ensuring only their cultural agendas and narratives receive the dialogue's air supply, assuring the codification of these resultant ideals and deciding what normalcy entails. And sadly, these absolutes became internalized across the full spectral range, even within those of most compromised privilege. And so you begin to see the cyclical nature of the dysfunction and the resulting inertia against positive change and raising awareness of the most unproblematized issues, which, I think we can agree, is pretty problematic. Post-spectral world, lol, buoys, OJAs, CIPs, Royal Vs, narratives, agendas, narratives. And really, it's everyone's business to examine their privilege, even Burgundies, who may be subject to the pitfall of believing incorrectly there are none on the scale beneath them who they enjoy certain privileges over, which off-spectrum trolls will never know, such as those identifying as other bloods or caste multiples polyblooded, anyone who hemoglobically identifies as having a caste which manifests nowhere, as yet known, in anyone physically, or for that matter, off-specs who physically do possess such a blood type, or mutants. Very problematic term, highly triggering to some, be warned, such as you and I, Carcat. But this puts us both in a situation which, to our knowledge, uniquely allows us to understand and empathize with tragically underprivileged and unempowered groups across all scuttles of life, thus affording us both what I like to call a uniquely underprivileged privilege, which, yes, is a kind of privilege we should both strive to check as well whenever we can. This same uniquely underprivileged perspective, as I'm sure you know, was disadvantaged upon my post-scratch iteration as well. And while I have no doubt you justifiably came to revere the figure of your planet's rich history and your personal lineage, and while his goals were of peace, equality, and a truly spectre-blind society, I'm afraid I personally have trouble condoning his methods. I don't like to use the term problematic lightly. But, well, his tactics were nothing if not massively problematic, to say the least, employing violent uprising to effect change and emblazoning his mark upon history and his faithful followers with the salty flourish of a single rude shouted swear word. It's not to my taste, even though he is who I would have grown up to be in another life. But no, I prefer to effect social change through rational, honest discourse and contributing to ongoing dialogues, focusing on what should be the real goals, through keen adherence to the discipline of problematics, ensuring that we stay focused on successfully problematizing a wide range of direly undercomplicated social dilemmas. Undercomplication, salty flourish, rude shouted swear words, spectre-blind society. It's nice to see we agree on so much. Maybe we're not so unalike despite our drastically different upbringings. Anyway, as I was saying, the story of your ancestor, and more importantly my exhaustive list of misgivings with his approach to social change, is quite a long and elaborate one. But it actually fits brilliantly within the larger mosaic which captures the broad strokes of my post. I mean, our discussion. Trigger warnings for the following content include ancestor bashing, faith shaming, loud swearing, torture, burn wound, ship sinking. Again, seriously, just let me know if you begin to feel triggered by anything, even slightly. We'll pause and see if we can really explore these issues and identify exactly how I may have invalidated your struggles. Without further ado, the story is as follows. Trigger warning, ancestor bashing, shaming, swearing, torture, burns, ship sinking, struggles. You just need to educate. The Befferan way of life was entirely the long-standing power dynamics in play. Even more disturbing and insidious for their lack of acknowledgement in the cis-blooded cerulean toward an umpire as a consequence of what, in my view, were widely and distinctly cooler cast about their very long-term injustices resulting from the entrenched power dynamics. And this may prove to be a very hurtful microaggression to those of your planet's markedly more live that long themselves. Now, it sounds like you don't have unexamined privilege that we have freed ourselves from derailing the dialogue. Caution, nevertheless. Regarding Befferan society, largely equal rights distributed, I would like to qualify, and we can take up the kind of alternative brutality